The courtroom buzzed with static tension, like a summer sky before a thunderstorm. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, fingers poised over keyboards. Cameras weren't allowed, but every journalist knew this hearing would ripple across the country. It wasn't just about law today, it was about class, power, and the voice of forgotten Americans. Senator JD Vance stepped into the courtroom quietly, with a kind of still intensity that turned heads. He wore a navy suit, not designer, not flashy, but perfectly pressed, just like the Marine haircut he'd never quite let grow out. In his hand, a worn leather binder stuffed with documents, marked up memos, and handwritten notes. This wasn't just another hearing on government transparency. This was a grilling, a political spectacle masked as policy review. The ostensible reason: Vance had refused to reveal confidential sources connected to an explosive federal report that alleged corruption inside the Office of Special Projects, a shadowy pocket of government contracting. The judge overseeing today's hearing, the Honourable Addison R. Soloway, was infamous in legal circles for his clipped words and East Coast elitism. Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, federal bench appointee under 2 administrations, he was the type of man who liked things neat, buttoned up, and spoken in polished, standard American English. J.D. Vance's Appalachian drawl. It was like nails on a chalkboard to Soloway, and he didn't bother hiding it. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood as the judge swept into the room in his black robe, nodding once to acknowledge the press. He sat and scanned the courtroom over his glasses, eyes landing on J.D. Vance like a hawk spotting a rabbit. "You may be seated," he said. "Let's begin." J.D. Vance placed his binder on the table, adjusted the mic, and looked the judge dead in the eye. Calm. Controlled. Judge Soloway leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Senator Vance," he began, voice rich with pretense, "I trust you'll find it within yourself to provide full and articulate answers today, preferably in English." A few quiet chuckles rose from the bench behind him. Clerk staff, interns, emboldened, safe behind a robe. J.D. didn't flinch. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You'll forgive me if I request clarity. I know you come from, what's the term? The hollers?" A sharp intake of breath from the back rows. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." But J.D. didn't blink. He smiled, and what he said next would be played on every news channel within 12 hours. The smile J.D. Vance gave Judge Soloway wasn't one of amusement. It was the kind of smile that comes from a man who's been underestimated his entire life. A man who'd walked through coal dust and chaos, through Marine boot camp and Ivy League halls, through poverty and power. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly who he is, and exactly how dangerous that is to the people who want him silent. He leaned forward into the mic slowly, deliberately. His voice came low, calm, measured. His accent, that Appalachian drawl, wasn't softened, wasn't tucked away for D.C. politeness. It rolled like thunder across the courtroom. "Your Honor," J.D. began, "where I come from, we don't measure a man's worth by how clean his vowels sound. We measure it by whether he keeps his word when it costs him, whether he tells the truth when it's easier to lie, whether he stands up when it's safer to sit down." You could hear a pin drop. He didn't stop. "I didn't grow up in prep schools with silver spoons and speech coaches. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My mama was addicted to pain pills. My papa worked in a steel mill until it killed him. And the men I served with overseas didn't care how I pronounced my R's. They cared whether I had their back when the bullets started flying." He paused, just long enough for the weight of those words to settle like a heavy coat over the room. "So if you're looking for slick talking and smooth walking," he said, voice rising, "you called the wrong man to this bench. But if you want the truth, the real truth, you'll hear it in this voice, accent and all." Somewhere in the back, a reporter let out a whispered, "Holy hell." The judge's face hardened, but he said nothing. J.D. continued, pulling a document from his binder and holding it up. "This right here," he said, "is a signed and dated memo from a whistleblower inside your own federal bureaucracy. This isn't fiction. It's not gossip. It's testimony. And I will not betray the men and women who risk their careers, some their lives, to bring it forward just because it makes some in power uncomfortable." The judge cleared his throat sharply. "Senator Vance, I will remind you to stay within the scope of the inquiry." "I am within it," J.D. fired back, not missing a beat. "This inquiry's about transparency. about accountability, and about whether we punish truth-tellers for not speaking the Queen's English while the liars drink scotch in panelled boardrooms. There it was, the line, the moment. That quote, "while the liars drink scotch in panelled boardrooms," would be clipped, captioned, and re-uploaded more than any soundbite in Senate history. It would trend in under 2 hours. By evening, a dozen lawmakers would be tweeting their support. Memes would explode. Late-night hosts would repeat the line with awe, and millions of Americans from truck stops to college dorms would say, "Finally, someone who talks like us." But in that moment, in that hushed courtroom, JD Vance just turned a page and kept going. Because he wasn't finished. Not even close. Judge Soloway sat back in his chair, visibly rattled now. Not by aggression, but by clarity. JD Vance hadn't raised his voice, hadn't pointed fingers. He had done something far more dangerous in the halls of power. He had spoken plainly. That kind of honesty, spoken with conviction and carried by the weight of real experience, had a way of unraveling the polite lies the system was built on. The judge cleared his throat again, a reflex this time. "Senator Vance," he said, reaching for procedural ground to stand on, "you are not on trial today, nor are you presiding over one. This is a hearing regarding your refusal to comply with a federal request. The accent, charming as it may be, does not place you above the law." JD nodded slowly, then looked straight at him. "I never claimed to be above the law, Your Honor, but I do claim to be beneath its protection. And the law, as written, protects whistleblowers. It protects the press. It protects a citizen's right to know when their government is breaking its own rules." He tapped the stack of documents. "I've got redacted budgets, blacked-out contracts, and unexplained payouts to shell companies based in the Cayman Islands, most of which route back to subcontractors under the Department of Special Projects." The judge raised a brow. "You're alleging financial misconduct?" "I'm not alleging it. I'm showing you the damn receipts." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The stenographer stopped typing for just a breath. JD opened the binder, revealing a folder labelled OSP, internal only. It was frayed, highlighted. Not a glossy presentation, just truth on paper. "These files came from 2 different sources. One of them is a veteran who did contract work in Syria. The other is an analyst who's been threatened with termination, relocation, and God knows what else. I'm not giving up their names because I won't be the reason their kids grow up without a parent." Judge Soloway's mouth twitched. He was losing control of the room. Worse, he was losing the narrative. "Senator, unless you comply, with what?" JD snapped. "With a bureaucratic muzzle on truth? With a system that leaks against enemies but prosecutes patriots who won't play ball?" He stood now, binder in hand. "My entire life, men in ties told folks like me to hush up. Don't talk back, let the grown-ups handle it. Well, here I am, I grew up, and I brought a whole damn generation with me." From the gallery, a slow clap began. It wasn't loud, just one older man in a VFW cap, then a young woman with a press badge, then another. A ripple of rising hands. The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" But JD Vance wasn't shaken. He placed the binder on the table gently. "You don't have to like how I talk, Your Honor, but you're damn well going to hear what I have to say." He sat, calm, unshaken. And the room? It was no longer the judge's. The judge's gavel slammed again, this time with urgency. "Order in this court." But the room didn't settle like it used to. Not today. Not after what they'd just heard. That quiet, buzzing reverence for authority had evaporated. In its place was something new, something dangerous to the people who'd grown comfortable behind velvet curtains and mahogany desks. JD Vance didn't flinch. He remained seated, hands folded neatly in front of him, the same calm confidence of a man who's already walked through fire. Judge Soloway leaned forward, his voice lower now, less mocking, more calculating. "Senator Vance," he said, "do you understand the potential consequences of your defiance?" JD tilted his head slightly. "You mean the kind of consequences where someone from the hills gets dragged in front of a federal judge and made into an example?" "Yeah, I know the drill." "No one is making an example of you," the judge said, though even he didn't sound convinced. "Ain't that something?" JD replied softly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sure feels like the script's already been written. You think if this was some polished Ivy Leaguer from Connecticut with the same documents, you'd be threatening him with contempt?" A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge's nostrils flared, just slightly. "I suggest you tread carefully." "No," JD said, standing slowly again. "I suggest you listen carefully, because out there, across this country, folks are watching, and they're tired. Tired of being talked down to, tired of being told they're too rough around the edges to be taken seriously. Tired of watching suits like you protect the powerful and prosecute the poor." He turned, now facing the room, his voice rising, not yelling, just ringing with clarity that cut through the air like a blade. They watched what happened to that Marine whistleblower who got buried in red tape. They watched when that teacher in West Virginia got fired for exposing the chemical dump near a school. They remember when folks were called domestic threats just for asking questions. JD pointed to the binder. "And now they're watching you, Judge." Cameras outside the courthouse were already rolling live updates. Twitter was on fire. Vance vs. the bench was climbing fast. By the time JD turned back to the judge, producers from every major news network were clearing airtime. "I've been told I talk like a hick," JD said, quieter now, "that I sound uneducated, that I ain't polished enough for the halls of power. But I'll tell you something, if telling the truth with a country drawl is a threat to this system, maybe the problem ain't my voice, maybe the problem's the system." The judge opened his mouth to respond, but just then a bailiff stepped forward, a note in hand. He whispered something into the judge's ear. The judge's expression changed, barely. A flicker of something real. Shock, worry. He turned to his clerk and gave a small nod. 10-minute recess, he barked, rising. "This hearing is adjourned temporarily." He didn't wait for protocol. He just vanished through the chamber door, robes swishing like storm clouds. The courtroom erupted into whispers. And JD? He sat back down. He didn't smile. He just waited. Because he knew. Something had just shifted. The doors to the courtroom shut behind Judge Soloway with a dull thud, like a coffin lid being closed. For a few long moments, the room just breathed, press shifting in their seats, lawyers whispering to each other, fingers furiously texting updates that would ping in millions of pockets within seconds. JD Vance stayed still, not calculating, not posing, grounded. The kind of stillness that comes from knowing you've said what needed to be said, come what may. Behind him, his aide leaned in. "That note the bailiff gave Soloway, it's spreading like wildfire." JD raised an eyebrow. "It was a Department of Justice notice," she whispered. "Turns out one of the whistleblowers filed a federal injunction this morning, with supporting evidence, leaked emails, GPS data, off-the-books transfers." JD closed his eyes for just a moment, exhaling through his nose. It was happening faster than expected. In Washington, silence can be louder than words. But this wasn't silence anymore. It was momentum. The doors to the courtroom cracked open again. This time it wasn't the judge who entered. It was a U.S. Marshal. He didn't look at JD, didn't look at the press. He walked straight to the judge's bench, leaned into the clerk's ear, handed over a document, then left just as fast. A few journalists had their phones out now, but they weren't taking notes. They were streaming. One voice, half whispered from the gallery, rose just enough to be heard. "He's not just a senator anymore. He's a damn movement." And that was the thing. This wasn't just about JD Vance anymore. Not about his voice, not about the judge's insult. That moment had just been the match. The real fire was the dry brush it landed on. Years of working-class Americans being dismissed, ignored, and quietly punished for telling the truth. The door behind the bench opened again. But this time, Judge Soloway didn't come alone. He was flanked by 2 DOJ observers in dark suits. He walked slowly, like the weight of what was coming had just settled on his shoulders. No more smugness. No more quips about the hollers. Just an old man realizing the rules of the game were changing, and he might not be one of the players anymore. He sat down, steepled his fingers again, but this time with a different posture. Not dominance. Defense. "Senator Vance," he said, his voice just a bit hoarse, "it appears we have received new documentation that may impact the relevance and scope of this hearing." JD didn't move. "The Department of Justice has informed this court that certain classified materials as referenced in your binder are now under active review for corruption and misuse of federal funds. The materials appear to be authentic." There it was, live, on record. JD slowly leaned into his mic. "Then maybe, Your Honor," he said softly, "you ought to apologize, not to me, But to the people out there who've been saying this for years and were called crazy, uneducated conspiracy nuts or worse. A pause. Then, and maybe to the folks you mocked just for how they sound when they speak up. Judge Soloway's jaw tightened. He didn't respond, because what could he say? Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled in the past 30 minutes. News vans were triple parked. Cameras pointed at the courthouse doors like they were waiting for a rock star to emerge. Protesters, supporters, curious onlookers. Everyone was holding their breath, unsure if they were watching a scandal unravel or a new chapter in American politics begin. Inside, Judge Soloway sat stiffly behind the bench. The DOJ reps murmured quietly with the court clerk, passing files, sealing envelopes. The courtroom itself had fallen quiet. But it wasn't peace. It was anticipation. The kind of stillness that feels like standing under a dam, waiting for the first crack to give. JD Vance broke the silence. "I'd like to enter one more statement into the record, if the court permits." The judge hesitated, but finally he gave a stiff nod. "Proceed." JD stood again. He didn't look at the judge this time. He looked straight into the gallery, at the veterans with stoic faces, at the interns taking notes like their lives depended on it, at the single mom holding a notebook with JD's name scrawled on the cover, at America. "I didn't come here today to fight for myself," JD began. "I came here because there's a class of people in this country who've been told, by tone, by policy, by silence, that their voice don't matter, that their accent don't matter, that if they don't sound like a podcast host or a Georgetown lawyer, they should sit down and let the grown-ups talk." He paused, turning slowly, making eye contact with the gallery. "I was raised by my grandparents, both with 8th grade educations. My mama cussed like a sailor and could outshoot half the Marines I served with. She raised me right. She raised me real. And I promised her before she died that I'd never change my voice to make a liar more comfortable." A few gasps, a few people wiping tears, and somewhere in the back a hand rose, someone holding a sign scribbled in Sharpie, "Talk how you talk, JD." JD kept going. "This courtroom ain't just about federal law. It's a mirror. Right now, Americans are watching to see if speaking the truth in plain talk is punishable, if you get mocked, silenced, or sidelined for not talking like the elite." He turned slowly back toward the bench. "And today, Your Honor, you did mock me. You mocked where I come from. You mocked every steelworker who's been laid off, every waitress who's been ignored, every kid who got handed a broken home and told to smile through it." The judge sat frozen, jaw locked. "So I'll say this once, and I'll say it plain. I don't need your respect. I've already got it from the people who matter." He tapped the binder, and they're done being quiet. A moment passed, and then it hit. Applause. Not polite, not courtroom appropriate. Thunderous. The judge's gavel struck, but the sound was swallowed. Not by disrespect, but by a greater truth. The courtroom had lost its monopoly on authority. The people were speaking back now, and across the country the video was everywhere. JD Vance destroys federal judge for mocking his accent. He talked like me, and he fought like hell. Rural America reacts. JD voice rising, trends at #1 globally. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere in the Midwest a high school civics teacher was pausing her lesson to play the clip. Somewhere in D.C., a staffer was frantically updating a presidential briefing folder. And somewhere in a cabin in eastern Kentucky, a grandmother smiled through tears and whispered, "About time they heard us." By the next morning, JD Vance's words had been translated into 6 languages and subtitled by more grassroots YouTube creators than any political clip in recent memory. The full courtroom exchange aired on every major network, and what was once seen as a procedural scolding had become something much bigger, a cultural reckoning. In the Senate chamber, things moved fast, unusually fast. Senators who'd never publicly aligned with JD before were now cautiously praising his candor. Even political enemies were issuing statements. But what mattered more than the politicians were the people. Town halls across rural America were packed. Social media was boiling. Teachers played the clip in debate class. Local radio hosts played it twice in the same hour. For once, the story wasn't about what JD Vance had done. It was about what he'd said and how he said it. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. 2 days after the hearing, JD was summoned for a closed-door meeting in the Capitol. The kind where the real power brokers meet, the unseen committee chairs, the money men in tailored suits, the senior advisors who write the memos that write the laws. He walked into the panelled room like a soldier walking into a briefing. No binder this time. Just him. A grey-haired senator from Vermont leaned back in his chair and gave a dry smile. "Hell of a show you put on, Vance." JD sat across from them, arms crossed loosely. Wasn't a show, just told the truth. A younger senator from California, blazer sharp and boots polished, looked skeptical. "You realize what you're doing, don't you? You're splitting the country in half." "No," JD said. "I'm showing folks they were never invited to the table to begin with." Murmurs around the table. Another senator scoffed. "People out there think you're their messiah now. You think just because you talked with a little twang and gave a fiery speech that the system's gonna bend." JD looked up, calm. "I don't need the system to bend. I just need enough people to stop pretending it's sacred." Silence. And then the question came. The one JD knew was coming. "Are you running?" He didn't answer at first. Not because he didn't know, but because he did. Then, after a long pause, "I didn't come here to run for anything. But if this system keeps spitting on the people who built this country, I'll run through it." The table fell quiet. One of the older advisors leaned forward. "You just declared war, Senator, whether you meant to or not." JD's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then I suggest you'll get ready, because it won't just be me coming." He stood and left. As the door clicked shut behind him, a storm began to gather, not just of cameras and headlines, but of something rarer, belief. Not just in JD Vance, but in the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone who sounded like them could make Washington shake. 3 days after JD Vance walked out of that Capitol room, the backlash arrived. First came the leaks, anonymous sources claiming JD had compromised classified information during the hearing. Then came the headlines. Senator Vance under federal ethics review. Was JD's viral moment a breach of national security? They came fast and coordinated, like a missile strike of doubt. CNN, Politico, even the New York Times ran a front-page story quoting a high-level official who accused Vance of weaponizing populism. No hard proof, just enough smoke to cloud the sky. Cable anchors ran segments dissecting his speech patterns, not the substance of his message, just his delivery. "He speaks like a man who still wants to fight a culture war," one commentator sneered. "We don't need country swagger, we need sophisticated leadership." JD didn't respond, not right away. He knew the playbook. They'd try to drown the truth in noise, reframe the moment, smear the man so people forget the message. But the country didn't forget. They doubled down. A trucker convoy passed through Ohio with #JD voice rising flags flapping in the wind. A Navy veteran in Florida posted a tearful video. "First time in 40 years I've felt heard." West Virginia schools started a letter-writing campaign in support of talking like we do. And then came the moment no one expected. The second whistleblower, an intelligence analyst with 14 years of service, went public, live. On a late-night interview with a small but rising independent news channel, she sat down, face pixelated, voice modulated, but clear enough to verify her authenticity. "What Senator Vance revealed in that courtroom," she said, "is just the tip of the iceberg. I've seen internal budgets allocating funds for operations that don't exist. Black sites. Secret surveillance on domestic journalists. It's real." The internet broke again. Clips of her testimony flooded TikTok, Reddit, and X. Hashtags exploded. Memes lit up with slogans like, "They tried to mock the accent, now they can't silence the message." In Washington, pressure mounted. The DOJ launched a formal inquiry against itself. The hearing against JD Vance was suspended pending review, and Judge Soloway, he quietly requested leave. Behind the scenes, Vance's team received anonymous warnings. "Watch your back. You're making enemies. There's more than a political machine here. You're poking a beast." But JD, he didn't flinch. Instead, he flew home to Middletown, Ohio, and held a town hall in a school gymnasium packed with 3 generations of people, all of them hanging on his words. He stood in front of a folding table, no podium, no flag backdrop. "I'm not here to be famous," he said. "I'm here to break a window in a house that's been sealed shut too damn long." They stood, they clapped, some cried, and JD Vance knew then what started as a courtroom insult had become a full-blown movement, and the people weren't done. Washington doesn't take embarrassment lightly. and JD Vance had embarrassed the entire architecture. The next strike was calculated, not sloppy headlines or weak leaks. This time they went for the jugular. A Senate Ethics Committee hearing was announced, suddenly and with quiet fury. Allegations of conduct unbecoming of a U.S. senator, they said. Open to the public. Prime time, conveniently scheduled for a Monday night. JD knew exactly what it was. They're staging a televised ambush. His aide told him the moment the news hit. They want to humiliate you, make you lose your cool, clip a moment, spin it on loop and erase everything else. He nodded once. Then I won't give them what they want. What they wanted was a redneck meltdown. What they got was fire wrapped in discipline. On the night of the hearing, the room was packed. The walls seemed to lean inward with tension. Senate officials lined up like old statues, faces taut, clipped accents, crisp suits. The lead inquisitor, a senator from Massachusetts known for his cold surgical cross-examinations, adjusted his glasses. Senator Vance, he began, you've positioned yourself as a champion of the so-called working class, yet you've made accusations against classified programs you don't fully understand. Would you say that's responsible leadership? JD stared at him. No, I'd say it's leadership that remembers who it works for. Would you consider it responsible? The senator pressed, to question the integrity of a sitting federal judge. JD folded his hands. I didn't question his integrity. I questioned his contempt for the millions of Americans who sound like me, live like me, and get mocked every day for it. Whispers. Shifting feet. Flashing lights. Another senator leaned in. You realize the risk you've placed national security under by platforming whistleblowers and releasing sensitive files? JD's voice stayed level. No, Senator, what I realize is that national security becomes national hypocrisy when it's used to hide crimes. You're not upset I exposed something. You're upset people listened. That moment exploded online before he even finished the sentence. Hashtags stormed back into the top trends. Vance hearing, JD want back down, let him speak. Back in the chamber, the senior committee member tried one last swing. You've made this into a media circus, a cult of personality built on a drawl and a monologue. JD looked right at him. No, sir, you made it a circus. I just stopped pretending the clowns were in charge. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. The chair leaned forward, flustered. You think this country is ready to be led by someone like you? JD stood slowly. I think this country's tired of being led by people who've never had to worry about payday, never held someone while they overdosed, never seen a flag folded at a funeral because a promise made in D.C. got broken on a battlefield. He let the silence hang. Yeah, I think they're ready. The hearing adjourned. No ruling, just chaos in the media sphere. But JD, he didn't wait for the pundits. That night, standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial with cell phones lighting the crowd like stars, he made it clear, this ain't about politics anymore, it's about voice, dignity, truth, and I'm not going anywhere. It was a Wednesday night when it happened. No one planned it. No political machine greenlit it. No strategists handed JD a speech. It started with a tweet. He's speaking at the Lincoln Memorial. Bring a chair. By sundown, over 15,000 people had gathered. No stage. No teleprompter. Just JD Vance standing on the memorial steps, flanked by veterans, truckers, teachers, small-town preachers, coal miners, waitresses, faces that rarely made it into headlines unless tragedy struck. There were no flags behind him, no music swelling in the background, just that same familiar voice, the one a federal judge once tried to mock. He stepped up onto a single wooden crate someone had placed at the top step, looked out across the sea of cell phone lights and tear-lined eyes, and took a breath. I never asked for this spotlight, he said, but I ain't going to waste it. The crowd was silent. You all saw what happened. I got dragged in front of a federal judge and mocked for how I talk, because in this country we're still taught that if you speak plain, you must think simple. He scanned the crowd, locking eyes with people who'd driven across states just to stand in the cold. Well, let me tell you something. We may speak with twang, grit, rust, and dirt, but that don't mean we're blind. It don't mean we're stupid, and it sure as hell don't mean we're done. Cheers erupted like thunder rolling across farmland. This isn't about me, he continued, voice rising. This is about every kid told their dreams are too big, every worker who got replaced by a spreadsheet, Every veteran who came home to a country that said thank you but never followed through. He held up the old leather binder, that binder. This is truth, not polished, not approved, but real. And they tried to bury it under mockery and legalese, tried to make me the story, but you all made sure they couldn't. He stepped down from the crate and walked forward until he was standing among the people. I don't want your votes, he said. I want your voice. Keep speaking, however you sound, however you stand. Don't change a damn syllable to fit their mould. Then he paused, looked up at Lincoln's statue looming behind him. History doesn't start in rooms with chandeliers. It starts right here, with calloused hands and tired eyes and stubborn hearts. A chant began somewhere in the crowd. Let him speak, let him speak. And then, we hear you. We are you. JD, JD. Cameras rolled. Live streams surged. And as the wind cut through the monument and cell phones lit the sky like stars over the Ohio River, the man they tried to shame for how he talked had become the voice of millions who'd never been heard. The judge's insult was history now, just a spark. What JD Vance said next would be the fire. I don't care if you talk like Harvard or Hollers. If you speak with truth, I'll fight with you. If you fight for others, I'll stand beside you. And if they try to shut you up, I'll make sure the whole damn country hears you louder. He raised his fist, not in anger, but in defiance, in unity. And the people, forgotten, overlooked, dismissed, raised theirs too. Across the country, screens lit up. And for the first time in a long time, America listened. Not just to what was said, but how it was said.